Okay, check this out, right? So first thing, this car doesn't always turn on when you press the turn on switch. So let's see if that works. And then secondly, let's see how many times it bongs at us. Oh, so it's turned on and bonged. That's good. Let's go.
So I reviewed this car recently. Didn't really like it that much, to be honest. There's no good reason for this to even exist, which is probably taking it a bit too far and is probably upsetting for some people, but there you go. I've decided to risk getting back into this car because MG has done a full electric version. So by making this car all electrified and not charging very much for it, hilarious pun, definitely intended, it is almost certainly the best value all-electric car on sale in the UK today. Now you'll see here that it's not the cheapest electric car on sale, but what you are looking at is a car that's roughly the same size as the Hyundai Kona electric, but which undercuts that particular car by thousands. That's once you've applied the government grants and whatever discount MG is doing at the moment, and will no doubt continue to do. It has a 44.5 kilowatt hour electric battery pack. Is there another sort of battery pack? It has a 44 kilowatt hour battery pack, and that is good for a range of about 160 miles. Now that's not the best in the segment, but it is good enough for most people, so you can see that we're building up a picture of a car that MG has thought very hard about in terms of a combination of price and performance and space. It's available in two specifications called Excite and Exclusive. And to be honest with you, the bottom spec is pretty much all the car you'll probably need. Panoramic sunroof, manual aircon, sat-nav, touchscreen, that sort of thing. Enough, basically. Let's just get into the car now. I'm very uncomfortable sat here.
When I first drove one of these a few months ago, the overarching feeling was one of cheapness. And it smells cheap too. It has less a new car smell and more a freshly melted plastic bag smell.
But the cabin does look okay. It's neat and it's tidy, and some of it is soft touch.
So you think about perceived quality, right? And for most manufacturers, to them, that means just, putting a bit of soft touch plastic or fake leather or real leather in some cases on top of the dashboard. All that really accomplishes is that you prod it and go, oh, that feels soft. If the steering wheel feels nice, if the top of the gear lever feels nice, if the door handles feel nice, you don't really think about the fact that they feel nice. You don't deliberately prod those things. You just take that for granted until you feel something that's really noticeably crap. For example, the parking brake in this car is awful. It feels like the switch is too big for the housing and it's like catching. It's dead stiff. It's a little thing, but literally every time you pull off the parking brake, this car feels cheap. Crappy glove box. Feels like shutting the lid on your wheelie bin. That's a terribly cliched reference, but I can't be bothered to think of a better one at the minute. Closing a packed lunchbox, there you go. Closing your kid's packed lunchbox. But it doesn't matter because if you press the dash top, that's a little bit spongy. So it still feels like a budget car, okay? Albeit the veneer of silent high-techery that this gets on account of being electric kind of distracts you from that cheapness, and that's a good thing. It's been a few months since I've driven a conventional ZS, and I've driven loads of other crossovers since then, but the echo of the car in my memory is sloppiness, slack gearbox and coarse petrol engine that doesn't really have much torque, just like unsophisticated, unmemorable. But again, the electric drivetrain does solve some of that stuff. So it doesn't have a manual gearbox anymore, and as we all know, the best way to fix a problem is to throw it in the bin. It is of course quieter because you don't have a combustion engine rattling at the front, but what that's done is it's kind of brought the noise levels of the other stuff into focus a little bit more. So it seems quite noisy in here still, quite a lot of road noise, quite a lot of wind noise, and they're both problematic above 30-40 miles per hour. So if you're in town, it's okay. It's got that lovely silence, quote unquote, that you get from an electric car. But then when you get it on the motorway, it starts to feel a little bit more turbulent. You can hear the dashboard rattling a little bit more as well. I remember the last car had fairly unsettled ride quality. Not really harsh, but just bouncy, That's still the case here. Not a catastrophic issue. Most people are going to find this perfectly comfortable, but if you put it under the microscope, if you scrutinize it a little bit more, you do start to feel like it's never quite settling down in the way you want, and it's just a little bit more harsh, a little bit firmer than you might want it to be. That actually applies to the steering as well. Around town, the steering of this car seems needlessly heavy, and that doesn't necessarily transfer into a steering rack that then gives you a feel when you want to drive a bit more dynamically, let's say. The major problem that this solves as compared to the petrol stuff though is that because it's an electric drivetrain, it gives you that instant torque hit. So it's not the quickest electric car you'll ever feel. I think it does 0 to 62 in like 8.5, so it is quite quick, but it sort of seems to run out of steam at like 60 miles per hour. Whatever the stats say on paper, this is a car like all the rest of them that you put your foot down and it feels responsive, you know, and that is certainly not the case with the petrol engine stuff. But back to the handling, right, as if it really matters, this thing is actually really heavy. The difference between the lightest one, which is a base model petrol, and the heaviest one, which is a top of the range electric car, is something like 700 pounds, which is kind of like having a donkey strapped to the roof, which has also got a small pig strapped to its back. But it does mean that they've had to beef the suspension up, which has a detrimental effect on ride quality, and it means it's not as quick as it could be. Give MG some credit though, the company has packaged the battery really well. The boot space is unaffected, which is impressive because quite often when a car manufacturer has to shoehorn an electric drivetrain into a chassis that was developed to be a standard car, boot space can suffer because they'll have to put bits of the battery there or whatever. Here they've packaged the battery below the rear seats, so no effect on boot space, and also it hasn't had an effect on rear space, head or leg in general either. MG claims a 160ml range using the WLTP test, and I've had this for a week now and that seems a little bit optimistic. I've probably been getting closer to 120, 130. But still, a lot of that's been on the motorway. It's been really cold and that's known to have a big effect on battery range. And I think the overall story is that it's enough. It's going to give you more than 100 miles. And for most people, that's going to be fairly non-problematic. It's true that it's not as impressive as, you know, the top level Leafs now and the Hyundai Kona. But if you are just using this to commute and you manage the battery properly, not a problem. The word that comes to mind is adequate, and I think that's something that kind of applies to this car in general, and that's why I'm conflicted about this car, right? So it's pretty dull to drive, it's pretty dull to look at from the inside or the outside, but it does a job and it does it fairly cheaply. So just to show you what I mean, this is the sort of car that I'll sit and I'll slag it off and I'll say that I don't really like it very much, but you might, and you might want to buy one. Because that's me just being honest about how I feel about the car as I'm sat here and what it's been like to use over the last week. But also I have actually recommended this to a friend this week. I've got a friend who is a Leaf owner, first gen Leaf owner, is looking to upgrade soon, needs a bit more space, and actually this seems to be the most suitable car for her. And it's a strange thing to do that. It's strange when you start recommending cars that you don't necessarily like. But for roughly the same price, if not a little bit cheaper than a new Leaf, she can get this, which has got a lot more space. It's got a range that's perfectly acceptable, and it's got that higher driving position and all that SUV type stuff that people like. Anyway, back to being a reviewer. There are some major irritations with this car. The first one is the infotainment. It looks nice, it's been designed with these like bright tiles. It looks as though it was designed by somebody doing an apprentice task. Ooh, young people, they like brightly coloured things, and then they've forgotten that actually the business of it being intuitive, responsive, is a bit more important than that.
You're a bloody shambles and you haven't got a bloody clue.
But worse than that is the fact that this car is constantly bonging at you. Right, so that's the bong that tells me that the lane keep assistant is off. Now, I didn't switch it off, but presumably somebody did, and they probably don't need a bong to tell them that every time they drive the car thereafter. And then the other thing this car does, it will spend about half a mile going through the stuff that's switched on and not switched on. So you can't actually go through the trip clock yourself until you're half a mile down the road. It's probably not that long, but it feels like ages. And then even this particular car, press prepped car, has had a couple of little gremlins. So I was out with the kids the other day and the rear seatbelt sensor went a bit mental. And the car started bonging to tell us that one of the kids didn't have their seatbelt on when they did, and it wouldn't stop. Some of it's really cool. So next to the rotary dial for the gear selector, which in itself is actually very nice, there's one that lets you see how much battery range the car's got left really quickly. There's one that sorts out the kinetic energy recovery system between its like 3 different settings. 1, 2, 3.
3, 2, 1.
Setting 1 is you don't get much energy recapture. Setting 3 is you get lots of it, which gives you that strong braking effect, which is better for when you're going around town, so you're recapturing more energy when you're decelerating. The switches look good and they're shortcuts that work well rather than you having to fanny on with this screen, which I spoke about before. But then on a more basic level, the driving position is as compromised here as it is in the conventional version of this car. Now, there is no reason for MG to have changed that, but it's worth mentioning again. Steering wheel doesn't adjust for reach, it only adjusts for height. The problem is, classic small car thing, if you've got bigger legs and you need to put the seat a bit further back to get your feet far enough away from the pedals to be comfortable, you then feel like you're too far away from the steering wheel. And generally, you just feel like you're sat too high in this car. You feel like you're sort of perched on top of it. It goes back to that issue of like perceived quality. If you're constantly sat in a driving position that just feels a bit like you're squashed into a small car, or not 100% in the exact position that you want to be, it adds to this sense that you're in like a cheap product. It feels like the budget electric SUV that it actually is. You might be fine with that. You might want to spend a bit more to get something a bit more sophisticated, like the Hyundai Kona, which is just on a different level to this in every way. The end.
So there you go, thank you for watching, and please remember, when I say that a particular car is less than brilliant, I'm not saying that you are less than brilliant by proxy if you happen to own or like that particular car. So just something to think about before you start typing. In fact, if you're still here and watching me say this now, then in my opinion, you are brilliant. Thanks again for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. I hope you like this. Let me know what you think of this. I'm trying to figure out a way of getting rid of the green screen and keeping things interesting for me and you. I think the next car I'm doing is Range Rover Evoque. I'll probably put that out early next week. Then after that, I've got my top 5 cars of the year and my worst 5 cars of the year. So if you hit the notification bell, you'll find out exactly when they turn up, but it will be before New Year. Thanks again. Hit subscribe. See you soon. Bye.